She knocked on a mansion door begging for water. The man who answered looked just like her father. The Lagos sun did not simply shine that afternoon, it struck. Over Agege, the heat bore down like a punishment, pressing zinc roofs until they rattled, wringing sweat from every pore. The air itself seemed to burn. Amaka balanced a stack of parcels on her head, her blouse glued to her skin, her legs trembling. She had delivered packages before under brutal heat, but this day felt different. Her throat was chalk, her lips were cracked. Every step tilted the ground beneath her as though the city itself wanted to push her down. At Oshodi Bridge, she nearly stumbled, clutching the parcels to keep them from scattering. A hawker raised a sachet of water, shouting, "Pure water, 50 naira." Amaka reached into her pocket but found only coins too small. The hawker sneered, turned away, and she swallowed a lump of shame sharper than thirst. The city noise pressed in, conductors yelling bus routes, hawkers chanting prices, engines roaring. Yet beneath the noise, all Amaka could hear was the desert inside her throat. She thought of turning back home, but the road stretched long. Then, as if fate were whispering, she overheard two women gossiping by a bus stop. One claimed her sister had fetched water from Ikoyi, so pure it tasted of rain gathered in heaven's bowl. The other lowered her voice. "They say one of those mansions has a borehole. Even the guards drink like princes." The words lit a fire in Amaka. Ikoyi, far across the bridge, a world away from Agege's noise. A place of towering gates, of silence purchased by wealth. She had never set foot there, but thirst makes strangers of fear. She shifted the parcels to one arm, flagged down a Danfo-heading island bound, and whispered her grandmother's proverb, "Where water is, the thirsty must go, even if it lies behind a lion's teeth." Inside the rickety Danfo, passengers pressed shoulder to shoulder, sweat mixing like a single river. The conductor barked insults at those asking for change, his voice raw from repetition. Amaka stared out the window, watching the city transform. The cracked pavements of Agege gave way to Yaba's cleaner roads. Then came the endless stretch of Third Mainland Bridge, the lagoon below glittering like a cruel joke. Water everywhere, poisoned beyond drinking. By the time the bus rattled into Ikoyi, Amaka felt as if she had crossed into another country. The air itself moved slower here. Palms arched over manicured lawns. Luxury cars purred instead of backfiring. Gates stood tall, barbed and polished. The conductor hissed when she asked to drop, muttering about stray people. She ignored him and climbed down, clutching her empty plastic bottle. She walked past gates crowned with barbed wire, past guards whose eyes followed her parcels with suspicion. Finally she reached the tallest gate she had ever seen, black iron bars with a golden lion crest glaring at the center. Her hand hesitated. Could she really knock? Could a poor courier dare ask for water here? Her throat answered for her. She tapped timidly, then harder. The creak of the gate split the silence. Slowly it opened, not by a servant, not by a uniformed guard, but by a man. The world hushed. He wore a white buba that shimmered under the sun. His wristwatch gleamed, his ring caught the light. But Amaka's eyes froze not on his clothes, nor his posture of authority. They froze on his face, deep-set brown eyes, sharp cheekbones, a frown that tugged at memories she had buried. It was the face from old photographs, the face of a father she had lost when she was 7. Her breath locked, her heart thundered. The guard stirred, murmuring about the sweaty girl at the gate, but the man raised his hand, silencing them. His gaze stayed fixed on Amaka, studying her as though she were an echo returned. "Water," she managed, lifting the empty bottle. The man's frown deepened, then softened. He gestured to a guard who fetched the bottle, but the man himself twisted the cap and placed it gently into her palm. His touch was brief, yet electric. In his every movement lived her father's shadow. Her lips trembled. The question tore out raw. "Why do you look like my father?" The guard stiffened. The man's face froze. For a heartbeat, recognition flickered. Shock, guilt, something unspeakable. Then his eyes hardened. With a motion sudden as thunder, he swung the gate shut. The clang echoed down the quiet street. Amaka stood trembling, bottle in hand. She had begged for water and received a question deeper than thirst. A guard barked, "Oya go, this place no be for your type." He shoved her gently but firmly to the sidewalk. Amaka whispered her father's name, Namdi. Memory surged, his rough hands lifting her, his lullabies, the day he left to fetch medicine for Mama's cough and never returned. People said the Mushin clinic fire had taken him, but Mama had worn silence like armor. Now, staring at the mansion's crest, Amaka's doubts grew claws. If Namdi had died, why did this chief bear his face? If he hadn't, why had Mama buried the truth? As she turned away, a gardener at the side gate leaned close and muttered, "It is rare for the chief to open the door himself. Very rare." Then he bent back to his flowers, leaving her with more questions than answers. She memorized the lion crest. Symbols meant secrets in Lagos. The bus back rattled through nightfall. Lanterns glowed over markets. Traders hawked roasted corn and soya. Amaka bought fried yam with her last coin, the hot oil burning her tongue. The contrast stung her. In Ikoyi, silence and plenty. Here, noise and survival. At home, in their one-room apartment, Mama mended a neighbor's wrapper by lantern light. Amaka lingered at the doorway, torn. Then the words burst out. "Mama, I saw him. I saw Papa." Mama's needle froze mid-stitch. Her eyes, sharp yet trembling, met Amaka's. "Don't start. Your father is gone. Dust. Don't let your mind play tricks." But Amaka spilled everything, the chief's face, the driver's scar, the resemblance that stole her breath. Mama listened in silence, then sighed heavily. From beneath the mat, she pulled a battered tin box, its corners rusted. "This is all I have left," she whispered. Inside lay brittle photographs. Mama radiant in lace, Namdi tall and smiling. One wedding photo was torn down the middle. On one side, Namdi. On the other, a sliver of another face, almost identical. Amaka's heart pounded. "Who is this?" Mama's shoulders slumped. "Obiora," she whispered. "Your father's brother." Amaka's voice cracked. "The chief." Mama nodded, tears glinting. Once inseparable, until greed and fire tore them apart. She spoke of the Mushin clinic, how it had paraded as charity but hid darker dealings. Namdi had discovered irregularities, accused Obiora, threatened to expose him. Days later, the clinic burned. People said Namdi perished, but no body was ever found. From the box, Mama pulled a paper sealed in red wax, the crest of a lion. One word beneath it, custody. Amaka traced it with her finger, chills running down her spine. "What does it mean?" Mama snatched it back. "It means nothing but pain. Some doors are altars, you do not open them twice." But Amaka's thirst had changed. No longer for water, but for truth. The next day, Amaka returned to Ikoyi. From a roadside stall she watched the mansion's gate. Soon, a sleek car rolled out. The driver's face caught the sunlight, his jaw marked by a scar she had once kissed as a child. Her knees weakened. The driver looked exactly like Namdi. That night, she dreamed of him calling her Nwam. She woke trembling. The resemblance was no coincidence. Truth lived behind those walls, chained and silent. When she confronted Mama again, demanding clarity, Mama broke. Tears spilling, she confessed what she had never spoken, that Obiora Naji, the chief, had risen from the ashes of the clinic while Namdi had vanished. That the word custody was tied to children, taken, sold, erased from their mother's arms. And then the final blow, an anonymous message buzzing Amaka's phone. "Stay away from Ikoyi, or you will regret it." Amaka stared at the glowing screen, her breath shallow. The shadows of Lagos had reached into her room. The thirst for truth had begun, and it would not let her go. The following afternoon, she disguised herself as a street vendor. With a borrowed tray of roasted plantain balanced on her head, Amaka drifted toward the lion-crested gate. Her eyes stayed lowered, her voice steady. "Boli hot boli." She positioned herself near the side service door, pretending to haggle with the driver. And then she saw him. The driver walked the corridor beyond the service door, his cap pulled low, his shoulders heavy with invisible chains. The scar along his jaw glinted in the light. Her chest clenched. She bent to pick a fallen plantain, but her body trembled. The driver paused mid-stride, his head tilting slightly, as if an old memory brushed against his skin. His eyes flicked toward the door crack, locking with hers. For a fraction of a moment, recognition burned, soft, devastating. His mouth did not move, yet his face seemed to whisper the name that once sheltered her, Nwam. Then he continued, swallowed by the corridor. Amaka pressed her palm against her chest, holding in the sob that threatened to escape. "Do you sell, or do you stare?" The voice startled her. She almost dropped the tray. A young man stood beside her, well-dressed but not flamboyant, his air calm and confident. His eyes flicked toward the service door before returning to hers. "You have been at that hinge for a full minute," he said. "I am selling," Amaka stammered. "Bully, sir. Hot and sweet." He studied her, then smiled faintly. "Your accent belongs to Agege. But your eyes, they are here for something else." She swallowed hard, then slipped a torn photograph from her wrapper. It showed Mama in lace, Namdi smiling, and the sliver of another man's face torn away. She held it low, not flaunting, only offering. His smile vanished. He glanced at the crest on the gate, then at the photograph. "Where did you get this?" "My mother's tin box," she whispered. "The man in the picture is my father, Namdi. The other looks like mine," he finished, his voice tightening. "Obiora Naji, my father. The crest is ours." The silence between them grew heavy. Then he said, "I am Chike." Her heart thudded. "The chief's son." Chike lowered his voice. "If my father opened the gate for you, it means something in your face opened one in him. He never does that, ever." He paused. "There are things about our family charity I have long suspected, accounts that don't add up, doors in the library that echo wrong. If you want truth, it hides there." Hope sparked in Amaka's chest. Chike scribbled a number on a scrap of paper and tucked it under the tray. "Borrow a phone. Call me after dusk. Houses like this keep sound locked in, but Lagos streets listen." Amaka nodded, her breath shallow. An unlikely alliance had been born. The next morning, Amaka traveled to Mushin. If truth lay in the ashes of the clinic, she would sift them with her own hands. The market buzzed, hawkers chanting, smoke rising from Akara fires, children chasing each other through narrow alleys. She asked questions carefully, moving from stall to stall. Most waved her off. But one pepper seller leaned close and whispered, "Ask for Nurse Iredi, but guard your shadow." Amaka followed the clue to a small pharmacy. Inside, a tired woman in her 40s sorted medicine packets. When Amaka slid the torn photograph across the counter, Iredi froze. Her hands trembled, her lips parted in a gasp. "Naji," she whispered, as if the name were poison. "You knew him," Amaka said urgently. Iredi pulled her into a back room, eyes darting like a hunted animal's. She lowered her voice to a broken rhythm. "Your father worked here. He saw too much. The clinic was not charity, it was a market. Babies stolen, paperwork forged, adoption sold to the powerful. Namdi found the ledgers. He said he would expose them. That night, the fire came." Amaka's breath caught. Iredi's eyes filled with tears. "They said he perished. But I do not believe it. A man like him does not burn so easily. If he lived, they forced him into silence. Perhaps they made him a shadow in their house." Her voice broke. She rummaged in a drawer and pulled out a slip of paper. On it, a string of numbers and letters. She pressed it into Amaka's palm. "A ledger number, hidden records. If you find it, you find more than your father. You find the empire that stole children." Amaka clutched it, her pulse racing. Iredi's voice cracked. "But if you chase this, they will notice. And when they notice, they do not forgive curiosity." Amaka's jaw tightened. If truth cuts, let it cut me first. When Amaka returned home, Mama was waiting. Her eyes were heavy, her hands twisting her wrapper. "You must stop this madness," Mama whispered. "Ghosts eat the living before they eat themselves. Leave the past where it lies." Amaka knelt before her. "Papa is not a ghost. He is flesh, or he was. If he is gone, I must know who stole him. I cannot live drinking lies." Mama wept, cupping her daughter's face. "Some doors are not meant to be opened." "Then let me be the one to open them," Amaka replied. "If truth destroys me, at least it will not destroy me slowly." That night, as Nurse Areti closed her small pharmacy, two men in black jackets emerged from the shadows. Their hands were swift, their faces masked. They bundled her into a waiting van. Her phone clattered to the ground, buzzing faintly in the dust. By dawn, Mushin whispered of her disappearance. When Amaka's phone rang, her blood turned cold. On the screen was a photograph. Areti, bound to a chair, gagged, terrified eyes begging for rescue. The message beneath, "Bring the ledger number, or she dies." Amaka stared, her chest tightening, her world narrowing. The fight was no longer just about her father. It was about saving the one witness who could make the truth undeniable. Night had settled over Ikoyi like a velvet cloak. The mansion glowed faintly, its windows lit as though nothing had ever burned inside its walls. But Amaka and Chike knew better. They slipped through the service gate, moving in silence. The library loomed, its tall doors polished, its chandeliers asleep. Chike went straight to the wall he had always distrusted. Together they heaved the shelf aside, revealing the smooth wooden panel. He pried with a hidden toolkit. The panel groaned, reluctant to betray its secrets. At last it gave way. Inside lay the chest, sealed with the lion crest. They dragged it out and lifted the lid. The smell of aged ink and paper spilled into the room. Amaka's hands trembled as she opened the first file. Names stared back at her. Infants, mothers, judges, payments logged like bribes to heaven. Beside some names, a single word cut like a knife, transferred. Chike's jaw tightened. Here, dates aligning with the clinic fire. And there, my father's name, buried under donations. Amaka photographed each page, her hands steady despite her racing pulse. "These are not ledgers," she whispered. "They're graves." When the last photo was captured, they repacked the chest and slid it back into its hollow. The shelves closed, the rug smoothed. The room looked untouched. But their souls had changed forever. Later that night, in a backroom lab in Yaba, Amaka handed over a wineglass she had smuggled from the chief's study. 2 days passed in torment. When the message finally buzzed on her phone, her chest seized. She read aloud with trembling lips. "Chief Obiora Naji is not your father, but DNA confirms he is your father's brother." Her knees weakened. She clutched Chike's arm. "Then it's true. He and Namdi are blood. My father's brother. My uncle?" Chike's eyes filled with conflict. "Which means the man who betrayed your father is your kin?" Amaka pressed her hands to her face, her tears hot. "I don't want their blood." "Blood is not destiny," Chike said softly. "Choices are. You've already chosen differently." Before they could act on the files, the house struck back. A roar shattered the mansion at dawn. The library windows exploded outward, fire surging into the sky. Flames devoured shelves, smoke bled into the night. Guards screamed, hoses flailed, but the inferno moved with purpose. By morning, the newspapers were already aligned. Gas leak in the Ikoyi mansion. Analysts repeated the lie. The truth had been reduced to ash, again, but not completely. Amaka still held the photographs on her phone. Meeting in secret, Namdi told them what the fire could not erase. His voice was low, his scar catching the dim light. "You think Obiora is the mastermind. He isn't. He is only a pawn. The true hand is Judge Okonjo. He commands the network. The files burn because he orders it. Obiora obeys, but the judge rules." Amaka's stomach twisted. A judge, a man sworn to justice. Then he must fall, she said. But Lagos whispered warnings. Men who dined with presidents were not toppled easily. One afternoon, in Balogun Market, hands clamped on Amaka's arms. Two men in dark shirts dragged her toward a waiting tricycle. She fought, but their grip was iron. Panic swallowed her. But Lagos rose. A pepper seller hurled her tray, peppers exploding like sparks. A butcher swung his cleaver. Women battered the men with slippers. "Leave our daughter!" they screamed. The attackers fled under a rain of curses and stones. Amaka collapsed, bruised but alive. The city had chosen to shield her. Elsewhere, Chike was ambushed in an alley. Suited men beat him with cruel precision, leaving ribs bruised and blood staining his shirt. Yet when he stumbled into their meeting later, he forced a crooked smile. "They can break ribs," he rasped, "but not names." Eunice, the EFCC officer, gathered them in a dim office. She slapped files onto the table, her voice sharp. "Photos are not enough. Lagos mistrusts images. They'll say Photoshop, propaganda. We need living testimony. We need to show it as it happens." Amaka swallowed hard. That meant Iridi. That meant her father. Without them, evidence was ash. But her phone buzzed again. A live video appeared. Nurse Iredi, bound, gagged, eyes wild with fear. The lion crest glared behind her. A distorted voice spoke. "Bring the ledger number, or she dies." Amaka's blood froze. The plan was drawn at a shuttered suya stand. Maps spread on a plastic table, roles assigned like weapons. Eunice's EFCC team would raid a charity annex, a building tied to the judge. Body cams would stream continuously. Tunda the journalist would mirror feeds. Chike would infiltrate as a contractor, Mama as a grieving donor, Amaka as her niece. Truth would not be whispered, it would be broadcast. That night they entered the annex. The reception gleamed with false charity, posters promising families built by love. Mama spoke in a trembling voice, asking questions like a donor seeking options. Amaka angled her body cam toward the facilitator who smiled too smoothly. Chike slipped down a corridor, clipboard in hand. He found locked cabinets humming with servers, evidence pulsing in the dark. Then the signal came. Our route open. Eunice stormed through the doors with her officers. Sirens wailed outside. Body cams streamed live. Lagos was watching. The judge arrived too, early, flanked by his kill team. His voice dripped arrogance. "Children are currency," he said. "We choose who deserves them." The word spilled into cameras, into feeds, into the city's veins. Hashtags ignited. Hashtag stolen children. Hashtag truth in Lagos. Hashtag Naji Empire. The raid erupted. Officers burst into hidden wards. Cots lined with numbers, mothers sobbing, charts marked transferred. Nurse Areti was dragged out alive, clutching ledgers wrapped in cloth. Gunfire cracked. Chike was grazed in the side but stayed upright. Obiora, pale and broken, stepped forward at last. "Enough," he shouted. "This judge used me, used our name. He built wealth from ashes. Tonight, it ends." The confession, caught live, sealed the empire's ruin. The judge was seized, his men scattered. The annex, once a temple of lies, had become a crime scene. And Lagos roared. Dawn arrived with a sound Lagos rarely heard, silence after sirens. The annex's lights flickered to an exhausted stillness, and the air that had been cut by orders, gunshots and sobbing, finally let breath return to ordinary lungs. People kept arriving, neighbors, shopkeepers, mothers who had heard a rumor speaking their child's name back to them. They pressed against the tape, whispered prayers, raised phones. Somewhere in that crowd the city made a decision. It would remember. Eunice stood in the foyer, jacket dusted with plaster, hair loosened by the night's sprint through hell. She briefed her team with a voice that had learned to be still without shouting. "Chain of custody starts now. Every file gets a handler and a number. Every rescued mother gets an advocate. Anyone who tries to call this confusion will find we inventoried the chaos before breakfast." "Ma," an officer said, Media at the gate. Good, Eunice replied. Let them film the floor where the chairs are bolted. Let them read the tags on the cribs. Let them see ledgers touch daylight. She turned to Amaka, who stood with her shawl still hiding the warm hum of a spent body cam. You did not break the law tonight, Eunice said gently. You placed a mirror in front of it. Hold your head up. Amaka nodded, though her hands were shaking with all the adrenaline that had nowhere left to go. Not far away, Nurse Aredity sat wrapped in a blanket, eyes rimmed red, but steady now, steady the way a bridge is after the stampede has passed. When Amaka knelt, Iti gripped her hand. You gave them back their voices, Amaka said. Areti shook her head. No, she whispered. We only stopped the theft long enough for their voices to be heard. Across the lot, Chike leaned against an ambulance bumper while a medic taped a dressing across the grays at his side. His shirt, once white, had learned the colors of night work. When he saw Amaka, his face, tired, bruised, alive, broke into a crooked smile. You stood, he said. You didn't fall, she answered, and for a moment their laughter came like a mercy the city was willing to grant. Then a hush rolled through the cordoned space, the kind of hush that forms when a story's oldest thread walks back into the room. Namdi stood at the edge of the light, his driver's cap gone, his hair gray at the temples, the scar along his jaw now a signature the city could finally read. He looked smaller than a legend and larger than the lie that had hidden him. When his eyes found Amaka's, they held every year between 7 and now. She crossed the distance. She didn't run. She didn't trust her legs. When she reached him, her hands rose as if to prove the physics of it. Skin, heat, bone. He cupped her face, and the city politely looked away. Forgive me, Nwam, he whispered. I taught silence to walk in your place. You taught me to hear beyond it, she said, tears slipping free. I forgive you. They stood like that, long enough for the sun to find them. Long enough for the cameras to become respectful instead of hungry. Long enough for the city to decide that this image would be allowed to heal more than it would be asked to harm. By noon the headlines had learned new names. Not the fake ones stamped onto forms, the real ones of men in suits and robes. Judges, clerks, doctors, fixers, the raid's live stream, Tunda's mirrored feeds, the van's body cams, Amaka's shawl, had rippled across phones faster than the counter-story could congeal. Hashtags weren't merely noise this time, they were inventory. Each post was a receipt the city refused to lose. Hashtag stolen children, hashtag annex truth, hashtag lying crest, hashtag justice not charity. Chief Obiora was placed under protective custody pending arraignment. The term was charitable, the reality not. He sat in a cooled interview room with a paper cup he didn't drink from and a face that had unlearned the art of looking important. When he saw Namdi through the glass, something collapsed behind his eyes. You were alive, Obiora said, not with joy, not with grief, but with the flat wonder of a man who discovers the trick he paid for has always been performed by someone else. I was made to live in your shadow, Namdi replied. But I am done being your alibi. Obiora closed his eyes. I meant to build good with our name, he said, and the sentence sounded, even to him, like marble trying to argue with ash. I thought money could bury what burned. He looked at Amaka then, startled, afraid, moved all at once. Blood has obligations, he said. So does truth, she answered. And truth didn't choose to be your niece. The statement landed where it needed to. A lawyer cleared his throat. Eunice glanced at the clock. The tape recorder hummed. Lagos kept watching. By evening, court orders began to move. Accounts were frozen, vehicles impounded, the mansion blockaded. The charities board was dissolved in one line of text that traveled farther than any sermon those men had ever funded. A judicial panel announced open hearings. They promised unflinching public review, and for once the words didn't feel like curtains, they felt like windows. Restitution, imperfect and late, started to flow. A fund, seeded by the seizure of Obiora's assets and swollen by donors whose consciences suddenly found their wallets, began to pay for searches, DNA tests, counseling, travel reunions. Mothers who had been told to stop asking now had an office where asking was the job. Ireti took a desk there. She built a registry on a donated laptop and good paper, one name at a time, her hands steadying as they worked. When she spoke on radio, her voice no longer trembled. "Write the names," she told Lagos. "Ink does not forget." Amaka sat with her many afternoons, helping mothers phrase their loss in ways systems would accept. She learned to translate grief into forms without letting the forms steal the grief. She kept the torn wedding photo in her bag, not as proof anymore, but as a talisman against erasure. When an older woman asked whether the ocean ever gave back what it took, Amaka answered carefully, "Not often, but sometimes it returns a name." Chike went to the places his surname had avoided. Mushin, Agege, Agenda. He met people who learned his face without ever learning to bow to it. With seized funds and his own inheritance, signed over publicly without fanfare, he opened a clinic where charity was removed from the Sinaj and replaced by care. He hired nurses who had resigned from the annex when their consciences grew louder than management. He rehired some who had not resigned but now let repentance work off a debt. He put a coffee pot in the waiting room and a sign above it that said, "A cup for whoever has waited too long for anything." He did rounds not because cameras were present but because lungs were. On the first day, he found a boy in the corridor drawing lions on scrap paper. "You like crests?" Chike teased. "I like faces that look like they will stop lying," the boy said, not looking up. "Is the lion still lying?" Chike sat beside him. "Not today," he said. At night, when the clinic lights clicked off, Chike crossed the bridge and walked the long roads of Agege with Amaka. They stopped for soya, for stories, for the sort of laughter that survivors learn to allow themselves, the unglamorous kind that arrives because there's finally space for it. Their hands learned each other's patience. Their pace learned to be soft. If people stared, some did. Lagos loves a complicated romance. They let the staring pass like rain on a roof that had been well built this time. Mama watched this with a smile that carried the memory of every night she had turned her face to the wall so her tears would not pick a fight with her daughter's hope. When Namdi moved his small bag back into the room he had once left, she cleared a drawer for him without comment. When he tried to apologize for breathing, she handed him a bowl of okra soup and said, "Eat, then fix the radio." It was the most generous absolution either of them knew how to give. He joined a group of drivers who had, over the years, learned that the city looks different from behind a windshield. They formed a cooperative, fair wages, night watch rotations, a code that treated passengers as cargo only in the marine sense. When his hands weren't on a wheel, they were on ledgers that recorded fuel honestly. He became the sort of man other men brought papers to when they were ready to stop lying to themselves about math. Something shifted in the city. Not everything. Lagos is too old and too inventive to be remade by one night. But phones came out faster when checkpoints grew bold. Reporters learned to keep power banks in their pockets. A market woman who had watched Amaka fight free in Balogun started an informal brigade, the Auntie Watch, who positioned themselves near gates and offices where petitions went in and silence came out. If you went missing for even an hour, they knew which door to knock with the kind of knuckles that tired guards respect. Politicians tried their favorite trick, called the outrage youthful and the facts partisan, but the annex footage stayed where it couldn't be spun. In 1,000 group chats, mirrored, clipped, captioned by aunties who did not need media training to state a thing clearly. "They sold babies," one wrote. "We buy peppers. We know the difference." Eunice fought the fight. Justice officers fight after the cameras leave, paperwork. Warrants, charges, evidence logs, the dull heroics of filing. She took the stand in hearings where lawyers tried to tangle truth and language. When one asked whether the live stream had poisoned the well, she answered, "The well was poisoned before we arrived. We brought a filter." The room laughed in the way rooms do when relief finds a line smart enough to carry it. And then, quietly, almost sheepishly, men who had once played proximity games with the judge showed up at the funds office with envelopes they could not explain to their wives. Repentance is not justice, but sometimes it's a start. Weeks later, the mansion's iron crest grew dull from disuse. Ivy began to test the base of the walls the way small things test big things for their sincerity. Obiora remained in custody, making statements that oscillated between confession and choreography. The judge slept on a thin mattress that did not recognize his old back. His first hearing date was set. Mothers added it to their calendars the way people add birthdays they had forgotten belonged to someone still alive. On a warm evening that tasted like the beginning of the Harmattan, Amaka and Chike sat on the steps outside the clinic. Music from a distant street party drifted toward them, carried on a breeze that smelled faintly of dust, diesel, and fried plantain, the city's truest perfume. Nnamdi arrived with a bag of oranges and a grin that had only recently remembered how to be wide. "I have something," he said, his voice careful in the way voices get when they are about to offer a gift whose weight they can't predict. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. Heavy paper, red wax. The wax bore a lion's crest so faint it looked ashamed of itself. Amaka's breath thinned. She turned it in her hands like you turn a sudden question. The flap lifted with a small sigh. Inside lay pages, not photocopies or clumsy scans, but originals. Codes, names, a transfer roster stamped with a different heading in the corner. Annex D, Port Liaison, West. Chike leaned in. "Not Lagos." "No," Nnamdi said. "The network uses the city like a doorway. But the room is larger." He tapped a line item that listed amounts in a currency whose symbol had once been aspirational in this neighborhood. This ledger was not in the library. It was in the box room behind the driver's lockers. Old files used as shade. When I realized what it was, I hid it where walls listen better, under the spare tire of the third SUV. "Why now?" Amaka asked, though she already knew. The wheel had turned, the shadow had stepped back. "Because there is a door we closed," Nnamdi said softly. "And a door that remains open. I want to be the one who points, not the one who blocks." They spread the papers on the step between them. A map began to draw itself in their heads. Ports, a church with a generous missions budget, and an incurious board, a shipping office whose CCTV always broke on the same day of the month, a clinic by the border whose maternity wing never announced birth weights. The lion crest popped up like a bad chorus. Chike rubbed his thumb over a stamp. "We'll need friends there," he murmured. "We have them," Eunice said, stepping out of the clinic's doorway the way the clever timing of fate steps out of novels. "Sister units, journalists who still know the difference between expose and extortion, mothers who refuse to forget which drawer they put the baby shoes in." She nodded at the ledger. "But we also need sleep. Tomorrow we start by telling the truth to the people who can protect it. Tonight we let our hands remember that paper is only paper until courage moves it." They laughed, because she was right and because the body insists on small rebellions against grand plans. Nnamdi sliced oranges with a pocket knife scarred by years of refusing to be lost, and they ate with their fingers, sticky and content. A child from the ward came out in a hospital gown 2 sizes too big and asked if lions ever get tired of being on gates. "Of course," Amaka said, "even lions like naps." "Do they dream?" the child asked. "Yes," Chike said, "of letting people pass." A week later, in a modest ceremony at a government hall that smelt like varnish and history, the first set of reunited families stood with officials who answered questions instead of burying them. Cameras clicked softly. This was not spectacle now. It was record. Amaka found herself on a small stage with Iredi, Eunice, and, unexpectedly, Obiora, flanked by 2 officers. He had requested to speak. He didn't perform. He didn't weep. He did the work. "I let my name be used as solvent," he said into a microphone that seemed embarrassed to carry him. "We dissolved proof. We dissolved grief. I offer what remains of my fortune to the fund. I offer my testimony to the court. I offer my apology to a brother and a niece and to a city that raised me better than I chose to be." It wasn't absolution. Lagos does not hand those out at podiums. But it was a hinge moving. Later, privately, he looked at Nnamdi and said, "I wanted to save face." "You lost the right to one," Nnamdi replied. "Start by saving names." When it was Amaka's turn to speak, she kept it brief. "We often ask water for mercy," she said. "But water obeys gravity, not prayers. Tonight, we remember that truth obeys persistence. If you have a name, bring it. If you have a ledger, bring it. If you have a fear, bring it. We will carry these things together. She stepped back to a standing ovation that felt less like noise and more like a city exhaling. After the event, on the steps where the hall met sunlight, Chike reached for her hand. "We have done something enormous and insufficient," he said. "That's how beginnings always feel," she replied. They walked, not away from the crowd but into it, accepting embraces, thank yous, the inevitable requests for selfies that Lagos uses to pin history to itself. A woman pressed the baby into Amaka's arms for a photo, then whispered, "He was almost a ledger line." Amaka kissed the baby's forehead and handed him back, her chest broken and mended in the same breath. That evening, the third mainland bridge lay like a ribbon freshly ironed by the day's heat. The lagoon beneath was the same, restless and reflective, but their eyes were new. They went there anyway, not for despair this time, but for measurement. How far they had come, how far they were willing to go. Cars hissed by. A fisherman lifted his net with the elegance of someone who knows exactly how much water to carry inside a boat. Amaka leaned on the rail where she had once considered letting the city finish her. The wind moved her scarf. The sun pinned copper to the edges of clouds. "Do you ever think about how close we came to not meeting?" she asked. "All the time," Chike said. "Then I remember, meetings are not accidents here. The city is a matchmaker for people who owe each other courage." She laughed, the kind that rises with no leash. "Is Lagos our benevolent auntie now?" "She's definitely nosy." They fell into a quiet that didn't need rescue. At their feet, small crabs negotiated rocks with comic seriousness. At their backs, billboards negotiated lies with professional courtesy. In their pockets, phones buzzed with things they could answer later. For once, later was allowed. Nnamdi joined them, coming slow because the day had taught his knees humility. He placed an envelope beside Amaka's hand, plain this time, no crest, no wax. Inside, photocopies from the fund office, requests, names, a growing list of families hoping their missing might finally be sought with something sturdier than rumor. "Work," he said, not apologetically, not tragically. Simply, "Work." She nodded. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he agreed. He looked at the water. "Do you know why fishermen tell stories?" he asked. "So their hands keep the rhythm," Chike guessed. "So their nets don't feel too heavy," Amaka added. "So the sea won't think it's the only thing that can keep secrets," Nnamdi said, smiling. They stood until the first stars remembered their duty. Then they turned back toward the city that had learned to watch its own reflection and not look away. 2 nights later, the clinic's generator hiccuped into a steady purr. The ward slept. The cooperative drivers drank tea from enamel cups that had the dignity of having survived other kitchens. At the little office desk, under a lamp with a good bulb, Amaka opened the envelope with the foreign ledger again. She traced a route with her finger. Port to parish to processing to paper. She wrote 4 names on a page, people they would need in a city not yet ready to meet them. A customs officer who hated bribes because his mother taught him to hate shortcuts. A priest who preferred revelation to incense. A midwife whose hands shook in church but not in delivery rooms. And a dock worker who could lift a crate and a conscience with the same back. Chike leaned against the doorframe, watching her draw lines that looked like hope. "We leave after clinic hours on Friday," he said. "Flights are expensive," she teased. "We'll drive. Men who hide ships forget about roads." She capped her pen and looked up at him. The lamp made a halo on one side of his face and left the other honest. She reached for his fingers. He did not make a speech. Neither did she. Some vows Lagos accepts only if they are written in touch. Mama knocked lightly and peeked in, carrying a plate of chin-chin she pretended was for patience. She appraised the map, the hands, the air. "When you go," she said, "take this." She set a small calabash on the desk. Inside were cola nuts, ginger, and folded under the herbs, a photograph. The wedding picture, mended with transparent tape, both brothers restored to their places, the tear now a seam you had to know to see. "Mama," Amaka began. "I do not ask for revenge," Mama said. I ask for truthful paper and a bed that doesn't burn. And if you find a child's name where it should not be, bring it home the way fishermen bring light to their nets. Namedee's shadow filled the doorway behind her. He raised a brow at the photo, then at the map, then at the two young people who had taught him that a bowed head can rise again. Road trip? He asked, like a father who knows how to make a blessing sound like a joke. Road trip, Amaka said. Her grin was the kind that makes distance shorter. They stood around the desk, 4 people who had not chosen each other but had refused to stop choosing once they began. The calabash sat open, the ledger lay waiting, the map pretended to be flat while holding hills. Outside, Lagos practiced sleeping and failed as usual. Inside, the clinic clock clicked gently toward a morning that would not be the same as yesterday. Amaka folded the ledger into a canvas bag and slung it across her shoulder. She switched off the lamp. The room went dark, then gentle, the kind of dark that believes in doors. On the wall, someone, probably a nurse with tidy handwriting and a sense of humor, had taped a piece of paper that read, "What quenches thirst can also choke courage. So sip, then speak, then walk." Amaka touched the paper as one touches a mezuzah, a cross, a familiar nail. Not for luck, but for alignment. She looked at the 3 faces she had learned by heart and opened the door. Lagos inhaled. The night accepted their footsteps. And somewhere, not in Lagos but within its long reach, another gate creaked, not yet open, not yet closed, only listening for a knock.